Okay, so hello, Brian. So before we proceed, could you please introduce yourself to our listening audience who may not know you and just briefly talk about some of the amazing work you've been doing?
Okay, thanks. Nice to meet you, Marvin. So my name is Bryan Paget. I live in Ottawa, Canada, and I work for the Canadian government at Health Canada and statistics. But I was programming, and I know a bit about data science and machine learning from from taking courses from and from self-teaching. But yeah, so I also have a bit of a background in art. Both my parents are artists, and I went to art school long time ago, so I'm interested in that as well. But
Mhm.
so basically, in terms of the type of work that I'm doing, I guess I'm developing artificial intelligence apps for health and safety inspectors in Health Canada. So Health Canada is actually I work for the regulatory enforcement branch. So some of the work that the health and safety inspectors do is a little bit tedious, right? So some of it we wanted to automate using some machine learning tools. So that's kind of what I'm involved in researching and developing. And I've got quite a bit of experience in natural language processing, and I do all that kind of stuff with Python and R. Some of the let me see, what else have I written here. We're also setting up, sorry, we're also starting a center of excellence at Health Canada for data science and data management, because we actually have we have a lot of in the government um, about Canadian people and about different companies that operate within Canada, and we want to make Health Canada into a data driven organization. And so I'm helping out with that kind of research and
Okay.
so it's programming, it's researching.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Like I've had a bit of experience myself with some data science, and I found, like it's really important that the data, is authentic and is kind of, like cleaned and all that stuff. So yeah, it's I think something that I've found, to be very, useful, especially now, given the fact that we are in this, era where there's lots of data and there's need like to make sense of this data. So yeah, I've always like had like that passion for like statistics as well, but I didn't really follow it up as a career. So anyway, so let's talk about some of the open source tools that you use during your professional work, and why they have become a fundamental part of your career.
Okay, sure. So I guess data science can be done in a bunch of different ways, right? So there's a lot of different tools out there, but I use Python and R primarily. R I really like for data analysis, which is built around
Mhm.
working with data. So like I'm between Python and R, but I like Python and I like R. I'm one of those people who tends to not, I don't like choosing sides on stuff like that. Um, but anyway, I use R and R Studio a lot of the time for analyzing data sets. There's some other tools I use like Jamovi. I think that's how you pronounce it. That's like a spreadsheet program.
Yeah.
Excel can look at data in the command. I like that one a lot. And I use Linux on everything. Like everything I do is with desktop Linux, and I like that. I like Linux a lot because it gives me a lot of freedom to work the way I want to work with the tools that I want to use, if those tools are available. Which for data science, most of them are.
Yeah.
Um, what else can I say about that? Oh, another thing I like about R is R Shiny. Have you ever used R Shiny?
Yeah, I think I've run a project before with R, and one of the things like I loved about R is it's a bit less technical compared to Python, and you can actually get a lot of things done when you're using R, and also I like the interface of like R Studio. because it was just easy to navigate, and you could basically run whatever you have maybe written within, like like the small widget that is supposed to display like the results. And yeah, I think R Shiny was also like a valuable tool, especially like if you are trying to visualize in sort of like a web application format. So yeah, I've had like a couple of experience, though it wasn't like a large experience with it. So yeah, I just find it to be fascinating, like working with those tools, like to make, small like sets of data, like understandable. So
Yeah,
anyway, so yeah, so basically that's just my small, like interaction with R and R Studio. Anyway, I understand you do have a passion for, like open and fair data. And I
mhm.
just wanted to know, what does it mean for you, basically, for data to be both open and fair? And what are some of the things that you believe could be put in place to achieve this goal?
Sure, thank you. So that's a good question. Actually, I tend to say open and fair together, but I think it's good to maybe ask a question like that, because what do I mean when I say that? I think when I say open, I just mean it's accessible, like the data set has been published somewhere so that someone can access it. So that's just kind of like when I say that, I guess I just mean it in that sense, just very minimally available. But I think fair data describes a little bit more about the data itself. Like, so FAIR is an acronym. It stands for findable, accessible,
Yeah.
interoperable, and reusable. And so I think, and I've actually copied it down some, because there's like 16 different criterion for this one. But I think findable is just about making sure the data is easy to find, and that's usually done through metadata. So
Hmm.
you might have a data set, and let's say it has a lot of text. It's very text heavy, or
Yeah.
have metadata that describes what the image contains. So anything that helps the data become fine. Yeah, this has to do with universally unique identifiers. So this is often, you see this like in cloud computing, they have these like really long names for
Hmm.
objects, like an object store.
Yeah.
And interoperable, that has to do with I think that has to file formats. Like I don't particularly like proprietary file formats, because then you have to guarantee you don't lose anything.
Yeah.
Then it's often like I think if in a file, you have to break it into two files.
Yeah.
And there's also the reusability. So reusability, that has to do with
Is
some of
it,
them kind of over. Sorry, yeah.
no, I was trying to, like inquire whether, like the data being reusable is something to do with, like having this data, like using this data for probably something else.
Yeah, but yeah, they kind of, yeah, exactly. But they kind of overlap a little, right? Like if something being interoperable so that it's reusable. So I think usability, yeah, it is what it sounds like. I've just got a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff here.
Yeah.
It says like metadata are richly. Just sounds like what I said before about findability and ability. So, but anyway, so that's kind of that's what I mean when I talk about data being open and fair. Is I just want the data to be indexed properly, have good metadata, so that people can find it. If you want to do some machine learning or some data analysis, you want to make sure you can easily find the right data set, and it also has to be high quality. Because when I first started working, is it okay if I just keep talking like this?
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay.
Oh, okay, cool. Um, is how it is often, it's very dirty. Sometimes it's not the right data. Sometimes more how to ensure we have high quality data. And so I think fair, and through fair, I discovered like Seek. That's like a nice catalog, data cataloging software.
Hmm.
I guess it gets used by a lot of different governments and nonprofit organizations. And we use CCAN as well in the government of Canada for publishing data. First project, I think, by Lyft, the North
Yeah.
American ride-sharing company. Mudson's a little bit more like an internally facing data catalog, and CCAN is more externally facing. And what I mean by that is like CCAN is probably better for people outside your organization looking for data. Like if you go to
Yeah.
the New York City Open Data Hub, that's
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's. I think that the open data catalog from New York City is very nice. It's got tons and tons of data about New York City and lots of different tools you can. That's
Yeah.
the kind of thing I want to do at Health Canada. As I want our data to be published in a way that is not just accessible like in the fair sense, but also just that
Yeah.
the data that governments have is it's a there's a lot of interesting research that can be done there. But you
Yeah.
want the data looking
Yeah.
for data and cleaning it.
Yeah, I think it's actually very important, you know, like to have the data very like clean because you know, like it's easier from my experience. It's kind of easier, you know, like to have it visualized and to just make sense out of it, and to know like the right you know, like algorithms to use when you're sort of like trying to map it out. So yeah, it just makes sense, and you know, like a lot of this data out there is not really clean, and it's from different file formats, and you know, like there's just a lot of, you know, like stuff collected and, you know, like put together, and it's really hard to like make sense out of it. Yeah. So anyway, so next, moving on to our next question. Do you believe there should be a focus on making data more open and fair in organizations such as Health Canada? And what are some of, you know, like the things that are currently being done to make this possible?
Cool, it's a good question. I like this one. So yeah, I think that we could do more at Health Canada and the government more fair. We do publish quite a bit of stuff. If you go to our data hub, so there is exists. I think it could be a bit better, but it Canada. I think we have 486 data sets published on the open data. Um, but like I said, this is like mostly for external use. I think a lot of the people I've been speaking to at work have been talking about how, you know, we want more data accessible internally for doing internal kind of research. So yeah, because a lot of data sets are owned by different government. I don't know, Finance Canada, but maybe they're related in some way, and maybe someone wants to do research at the intersection of those data sets. But that can be quite
Yeah.
difficult getting act to the things, and for good reason, right? Because a lot of it has to do with privacy, right? So you have to be careful.
Yeah.
More in the government is how privacy over to improve the quality of life for people.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, you know, like thinking about, you know, how, you know, like there are many restrictions within government, you know, like, so it's kind of hard, you know, like to make data open, given the sensitivity that may be involved. So yeah, so I think that makes sense. So anyway, moving on to like the next question. What do you think about open source in government, and do you think government should embrace more of this open source software?
Um, yeah, this question is this one's kind of tricky because I have my opinions. They're just
Yeah,
mine, and my opinions are open to change if people
I know.
debate with me. I'm a government because it's like public structure. It's like publicly owned in a sense. So and governments are about the public. So I feel like the two kind of go together. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know, I could be wrong, but it seems to make sense. And I know in Europe there's like this public money, public code. There's this kind of movement. where they want like
Yeah.
all the software that gets developed in governments to be released openly. I think that's a pretty cool idea. Um, and within the Canadian government, we do have a mandate where we're supposed to look into open source solutions first. So whenever we look into acquiring software, we try to look at the open source solutions. But I think that's a tricky one because I think sometimes there's a bit of misconception about what open source is, and sometimes people think open source means freeware or just like uh, yeah, just freeware. So they kind of don't understand who makes this code or who maintains it or who do you contact when you have trouble. And I know there are companies like, there's Red Hat and there's GitLab that make
Yeah.
open source products, but then a company that makes open source things. This is a difficult notion for some people to grasp.
I know.
And I
I
guess,
know.
yeah, and like GitLab's got a really interesting model where they have the enterprise edition, which I guess maybe has some features that the the support and all that. So I think there's work to be done in there around like letting people know what is so that they can make the choice to use open source if it's
Yeah.
but if it doesn't meet their needs, but if it does, it's a good choice.
Yeah.
And I think having governments use open source software is also a good incentive model. Like I was reading this having a public sector procurement to prefer open source software, provides a
Yeah.
software because they know that they can sell it to a government.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I just think, like it's a bit of a tricky situation, especially, like most of the people I believe in government positions are not really, like aware of what exactly is happening, like in the open source world, because it's much easier for them, like to maybe go for like, a more like a paid for solution compared to, like some small, open source solution that is not even known, but it's just known to like a couple of individuals. And yeah, like you mentioned, like it's tricky to say because, for example, like GitLab, it's hard, like to tell, if it's really like an open source, like organization whereby everything is free, or it's maybe like a company that is for profit. So yeah, so I just feel like there's like the balance, like that needs to be like that they need to strike to like gauge, like what the need would be for like that particular open source software. Like you mentioned again about like the European organization. So yeah, I just feel like that's maybe something important.
Yeah, and you're right. It is a balance because yeah, what is GitLab? Yeah, is it an open source project? Is it a company that makes an open source product? Yeah, it might not be like purely open source. Let's say I don't know. But is that a
Uh,
problem? Right?
yeah, 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 yeah.
There's always going to
I
be
think.
pros and sorry.
Oh no, it's okay.
I was going to say there's always going to be pros and cons, and if making something mostly open source, like open core, like maybe that gets you 99% of the benefits of open source, right? So maybe that's a balanced approach to take.
I know, I know. So anyway, like I like what like GitLab did with open source, because they sort of like this part where like it gives back like to the open source world, but then there is also like these features that are supposed to be paid for in like the enterprise edition. But when you do look at like both sides, you realize like most of the features that are on the enterprise side are available like to people on that are using GitLab as a free solution. So yeah, so I just maybe like how they put like the two together, because I feel like it's working out well for most of like the people who use GitLab. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, moving on to like our next question. So considering the nature of open source software, do you believe it would suit like government tasks that are kind of highly sensitive? And what are some of the risks that you think could be involved, and how can they be mitigated in case governments are to choose, open source software?
Okay, cool. So I'm not an expert on computer security or code review, so anything I say here might just be completely ignorant.
I know.
But I think that like if this code is open source, then in principle someone could review it. Whereas with a closed source, someone cannot review it. So I don't know. It could be the case that it ends up being a little bit more trustworthy. But it's also there was some I heard about a while ago with I was going to mention that the GitHub issue. Someone had a JavaScript package that someone added some malware to, but I think those are the smaller,
Yeah.
large open source projects. Like they're pretty well reviewed, are they not?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I believe, like
I was
most of these, yeah. So mostly like the big, like open source, like projects that I've had the opportunity to work on sort of have, like a consensus, and they have sort of like the documentation that they do follow up on in case they are to do reviews for like, and most of these open source, like projects that sort of tend, to discourage, like large changes. So they sort of like encourage people to make smaller changes that are easier to review so that they avoid, like this introduction of like the malware into like their projects, which I think is a great initiative. So yeah, so I guess maybe the size of like the open source project also matters in terms of, like the quality. So, and the level at which people contribute to this open source project. For example, like if you look at Kubernetes, for example, and you look at basically the people who are opening up, like let's say maybe PR requests, to make changes to like Kubernetes. It's a large number. So obviously, the resources that are available, like to run this project, and because of like the amount of like usage it has in the public are quite large. So you expect like Google to invest quite well in this kind of project. So yeah, so also the quality is supposed to be of somewhat good standard. So yeah, that's what I do believe as well.
cool. I guess one thing I've noticed when working on projects in the government is we publish. I work on a project
Mhm.
as open source. There's no thing relating to anything sensitive. So that's like another issue that we have that we create that we want to make public. We have to make sure it's not exposing anything.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so moving on to our next question. So what are some of like so let's basically just dive deeper into like the local governments and how exactly you think they could migrate to open source, and what are some of like the steps that could be taken to basically achieve the benefits that may come from like these open source projects.
Um, so you just cut out there, but I think I got I've got the question here, so that's fine.
Okay.
So I think in terms of like migrating over to open source is through small projects. So one of my projects is a and so we built that using like JavaScript and Python and open
Hmm.
source machine learning package. And then we're promoting it. So we build an app, promote it, and so I think people an idea of what you can do with open source. And I think that gets people excited, and then it gets interest, and then other people want to start participating and building things using open source tools.
Yeah.
And so then I think once you show, um, then I think because I think that's what people need. They just need to see it, right? If you just talk about it, the philosophy, ideology, that might interest some people, but if you show them this is what we can do, you can do very quickly, and it's high quality, and it's like using the same technology that a lot of big tech companies use, then I think people get excited about it, and we've got a lot of people excited about it. Um, So I think, yeah, and I think it's especially effective with the younger crowd. Like I have a couple of students who work with me, just like undergrad computer engineering students, and they take to they take to anything new quite quickly, right? And some of the people who've been working in the government for a long time, I think they get a bit accustomed to the way things are, and that's fair. Obviously, you don't want to force anyone to do anything differently. But if, like I said, if you get some of these younger people in and start doing exciting things with open source, then it inspires people, and then other people might be willing to take the plunge.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, like what you said, about the younger generation being, you know, easier to like lure us towards the direction of open source, because having been a student myself, I feel like open source was like this exciting like thing to jump onto. So yeah, most of the time when I was a student, I sort of tried out a new project and tried out a new thing, and of course there was a lot of time for me to do that. And there was also basically this urge to learn and just basically dive into the project, and then discover how this project could be useful in my career. And I just feel like when you're at that point in time, you could discover lots of things that are basically useful in the line of like the products that could make it valuable for, like, let's say, the government agency or probably any local government. So yeah, so I just feel like yeah, that's maybe something I would agree on, students and other people who probably are inclined to like the field of open source could probably be like the first people to lead the movement within the local government to sort of have these open source softwares installed or used within the government. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
Okay. No, that's it. I'm sorry. I just said yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So anyway, moving on. So what are some of like the risks that are involved in governments choosing to opt for open source technologies, and what do you think it will have? What impact do you think it will have on some of the major companies whose software currently dominates government agencies and local governments?
Yeah, so I guess this is another interesting question because at the end of the day, let's like we're all people, right? So people who work at uh, companies that make closed source software, and people who work at companies who make open source software, people who make open source software in the communities, like they're all people. So you don't want to, I don't want to do anything that I don't want to promote anything that would harm anyone, right? So I think that yeah, like some companies they don't make open source, right? Like SaaS is an example. Like we use a lot of SaaS in the government, and there are lots of alternatives to SaaS. And but I can imagine there's a lot of risk, financial risk, right? Like if you want to just like get rid of all your SaaS and start using R and Python, like that's might not be realistic to do over the short term. So I guess
Uh,
so. Yeah, I guess the risk is like yeah, harming existing businesses, but they can change,
mm,
right? Like Microsoft has been changing a lot. They're doing a lot more open source. So I wonder if some of these companies who traditionally do a lot of proprietary or a lot of closed source stuff, they could start getting a little bit, they start doing a little bit more open source and see how that works for them. Maybe it could be a slow transition because they've already got
yeah,
these existing contracts, especially like support contracts, where they've got a lot of infrastructure in place. Like we
yeah,
have these big SaaS grids or whatever. I don't know what those are, but we've got these big things that we pay a lot of money for. So I imagine you can't just get rid of those. So yeah, I guess it'd have to be something negotiated, and it'd have to happen over medium to long term, I would imagine.
yeah. Yeah, I actually think yeah, they could probably be a solution to that, or probably some of these softwares could be made a bit more open. Like you said,
Yeah.
Microsoft has done like a great job in making software more open. Because if you look at maybe like tools like Visual Studio Code and lots of other tools that Microsoft is currently making, they sort of have tried to make them a bit more open, especially when you use them on like the Linux platform. And I like the fact that, like they have, like tried to support, the open source movement as well as they are, like paid for software. So yeah, it's basically just I think something that you need to spread across, like also these companies, so that they see maybe the benefit of making this maybe product not necessarily like fully open, but then they make some part of it maybe open. So yeah, I think that will make more sense as well. So anyway, moving on to like our next question. Speaking about open source software, I noticed you shared on Twitter how much you are a fan of Linux. Can you, and basically you just hinted on how you use Linux for your day to day. So can you like briefly tell us about what drew you to Linux in particular, and could you like share from your experience what are the benefits of using Linux both for professional and maybe personal work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Linux is kind of like my favorite thing. I've been
Yeah,
using like I first learned about it when I was about like 16 or so. I had a Mac and it didn't really work that well on my Mac. Kind of boot a live CD, and but then I guess about 10 years ago I started using it just like full time because I was like, I love this thing. And what did I love about it? I know that's it's kind of hard for me to say. I think the thing like I really like when I was a kid, I liked playing around with themes on my Mac. I had these like I think it's called like Icon Factory had a thing to theme the icons in the windows, and so I really got into that. And then Linux just has so many more themes, and then so many desktop environments. So for me, when I was younger, because I was interested in user interfaces and user experience, like that kind of stuff, it was like a
yeah,
kid in a candy shop, right? You just get to play with all these neat things. Nowadays, I don't play around too much with that stuff. Like I just have like a System 76 laptop. I still like it all because I still feel like I have a lot more freedom when I use it because I use it and I haven't used the latest versions of Mac OS, but my girlfriend has a Mac, and so there's just like every time I use Mac OS or Windows, freedom that I have when I use Linux.
yeah,
Um, what it is like, I can install it on any computer I like. I can change the desktop environment if I like. If I were more savvy as a programmer, I could to the top effort. Um, but I've begun contributing a bit to the design, or at least what I think I'm doing is contributing. I've been like posting a lot of design mockups on Gnome's GitLab. I'm not sure
yeah,
how much they like. So what else can I
yeah,
say about that? Yeah, yeah, it hasn't. Oh, and I also went down. I had this long period where I was really interested. I never used Emacs.
yeah,
That's a kind of a weird thing. I got really obsessed with that for a while because it's like a whole operating system in and of itself, and it's got a very different user experience, but one that I kind of enjoyed for a while. Um, yeah, so I think for Linux, it's about freedom. Is it like freedom of expression almost? Like I feel like when I use Linux, I'm like, this is my choice. I chose this operating system. I chose this desktop environment. This is how I
yeah,
express myself. It's partly tied to that.
yeah.
It's very intimate.
Yeah, yeah. I get what you're saying, because like one of the things like I like about Linux is the freedom as well, because there are a couple of like tools that you have access to, and just the feel and tone of like doing your work is just overall easy, and it's just not a feeling that I could get like probably trying to like develop something on Windows, because I sort of have to like install these tools, and then there's a couple of like things that have to happen, and sort of you get lost along the way. But there's a way like Linux makes all this easy, and it sort of like bundles it all in like one place, and you sort of like get like this feeling of ease and satisfaction when you actually do use like the Linux platform. So yeah, it just stands out amongst all the platforms that I've used, especially like for like my programming kind of work and all that. And yeah, I just believe like sending in mockups is also like a major contribution. It's easy to be carried away back by code contributions in like the open source world, but when you kind of think about some of like these technologies, they have lots of people like who are contributing code to like this organization. So just sending in a mockup to improve maybe something to make it usable is quite a significant like contribution if you kind of look at it in a sense of like usability and just the people it may impact and the people it may affect. Yeah, so yeah, those are some of like my thoughts regarding that matter. Anyway, so let's move on to like the next question. So Linux seems to have a huge impact in the software market in general. Could you share what your opinion is about where you see Linux go in government sectors probably in the future? Like, where do you feel Linux is going to be probably in the future? Do you think it's going to replace maybe Windows in some cases? Uh, or do you think it's maybe something that is just a buzz or something?
Sure. Um, so I think, especially in the cloud, because a lot of stuff is transitioning over to using cloud
Yeah,
computing. So we are using more and more Linux. It's mostly behind the scenes though,
yeah,
which is obviously where Linux is very, very good. But I'd love to see more of it as a option for developers, like
yeah,
workstations and data science workstations. Because like with data science, I mean, like, maybe probably developers too, but data scientists often need like a lot of RAM, and so sometimes Mac computers don't cut it. You need a bit more RAM, or you need special graphics cards or something like that. Which, I mean, I guess Windows could you could put you could put Windows on the same kind of hardware as you would with Linux. But I guess, as we were just
yeah,
talking, environment and Climate Change Canada, they have a department where they use Ubuntu workstations. I know that because when I first started working for the government, I was like sending people because right now I've got Windows and I don't like it. And so I found out that environment and climate change have Linux computers. I have a Linux computer at work, but we're not allowed to. I'm not allowed connecting it to the network. So
yeah,
the special private network where we have data and stuff like that, I still have to use my Windows computer for. But any like programming or whatever, I can do that on my Ubuntu computer.
yeah,
And with cloud, like there's some people at Statistics Canada who are building a platform for doing data analytics on the cloud. They call it data analytics as a service, and that's something very promising. As a personal computer option in the government, I feel like that it'll become more feasible as more things move on, because then you don't need to have a Windows computer to access things. You just need to have a web browser. And so I think as things move to the cloud and as things move to open source, I think that will uh, developer and workstation running Ubuntu.
yeah,
Conjecture, but I think having Linux as an option, like for workstations, I think that'll attract talent. I think a lot of people would be like, oh, because traditionally it's like mostly Windows, right? So if they give you the option to have Linux, I think that's something to be excited about.
yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I completely agree, like with what you basically have mentioned there, because I feel like there is also this like genuine interest, like in using Linux. So yeah, it actually does make sense, like for it to be used also in the back end because like Linux itself, like has its own strengths and weaknesses. So yeah, I uh, I totally agree with that. So anyway, so finally, let's go to like our last question. Could you share with us some of your thoughts of what you think open source in government could or should look like in future?
Okay. Um, I'd love to see more collaboration, right? Like collaboration between governments. And I think working on open source projects is a great way to do that, because there's most governments are going to have like similar things they're trying to do, right? And so why not work together? I'm sure they do that already, but I'm just saying it'd be great if there's even more of that, probably. And I think governments can, if you're working, you can employ people to source projects that, like let's say you're using, you could employ somebody to be
Yeah,
like the GitLab. They work on integrating GitLab with, so they're kind of working with the government and with GitLab. So I see like I think in the government as being a good way to bridge and establish like meaningful relationships with with developer communities, and
yeah,
giving citizens like a way to participate. It's like you live in, let's say you're Canadian, you're in Uganda, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so you're a Canadian or you're Ugandan, like you want to like contribute to your country, your government. Like that's one way to do that. If they're using a lot of open source, you can contribute that way. So I think it could it's a
yeah,
it's a good way to share funding. Like a lot of money gets software in the government. That's like I mean, I guess at the end of the day, if the government spends money on closed source software in a business, they're still giving money to the people who work at that business. But I don't know. I think it'd be yeah, I don't know. I guess this is one of those ones where I have some ideas, but they're not very concrete. And again, I'm not an expert on this stuff.
yeah. I understand.
With the government, I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about
So,
that?
mm, I actually feel like, like maybe open source in future should be incorporated more in like government organizations, and I just feel like there are lots of like projects that are led by small teams that would benefit a lot from like maybe like governments and any big organization supporting. For example, like say like the movement whereby we see like most of these large tech companies like support like small open source projects, and this actually like uplifted most of these projects because like there was funding available for people to like work on these projects full time. So yeah, I feel like it sort of motivated like people to be more involved in like open source, and I just feel like it's the same thing like the government putting in the work like to establish like this network of small contributors would be really a nice it would be generally be like a great thing for these individual small contributors.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
yeah, kind of like Google
yeah,
Summer of Code, but it would be from the government, I
yeah.
guess, something like that.
Yeah, like a major like initiatives that would probably change like a couple of projects out there. Yeah, so anyway, thank you so much for your time. It has really been, like a very insightful, like talk. There's a couple of things like I've been able to learn, especially about, like how governments, like interact here and there. And I really appreciate you doing this call with me.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm very honored to be featured on this IMakeFOSS. It's a big yeah, it's a big honor for me, and I enjoyed meeting you, and I enjoyed speaking with I don't know how to pronounce his name, Joshen. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name,
Yeah,
but
I actually don't know how to pronounce his name either. So yeah, I think
okay.
that's something I would have to ask him. Yeah.